Mia never believed in fate. She believed in hard work, ambition, and control, three things that had taken her from a struggling intern to one of the most promising business consultants in the industry. But that night, under the dazzling chandeliers of the Luxe Grand Hotel, something shifted. The gala was a networking event, a place where powerful people gathered, exchanged pleasantries, and formed alliances behind polished smiles. Mia had attended plenty of such events, always focused on business. But tonight, she felt different. Maybe it was the exhaustion from working late nights, or maybe it was the champagne buzzing in her veins. "You look like you need an escape," a deep voice murmured behind her. Mia turned and her breath caught. The man before her was tall, effortlessly elegant, and exuded an air of quiet dominance. Dressed in a tailored black suit, he looked like he belonged here, like he owned the place. His dark eyes studied her with an intensity that made her pulse quicken. She tilted her head, intrigued. "And what makes you think that?" He smirked, raising his glass. "Because I feel the same way." There was something about him, something magnetic, dangerous. The way he carried himself, the way his gaze never wavered. "Then let's escape," she said, surprising even herself. Mia didn't ask his name, and he didn't ask for hers. It felt reckless, but for once, she let go of logic. They slipped away from the crowded ballroom into a quiet, dimly lit hallway that led to the private suites of the hotel. He kissed her first, slow, deliberate, as if savoring the moment. His lips were warm, firm, making her toes curl. She should have stopped, should have walked away, but she didn't. When he whispered, "Are you sure?" she answered with a breathless yes. And then, nothing else mattered. The world outside faded as they lost themselves in each other, in tangled sheets and whispered touches. It wasn't just passion, it was something more, something unspoken that neither dared to acknowledge. By the time the sun rose, Mia was alone in the bed. The other side was cold, as if he had left hours ago. The only trace of him was a luxurious black watch resting on the nightstand. She ran her fingers over it, feeling a strange pang of disappointment. It was better this way, no names, no expectations, no complications. At least, that's what she thought. What she didn't know was that this night would change her life forever. Mia stared at the 2 pink lines on the pregnancy test, her heart pounding so hard it echoed in her ears. No, this can't be happening. She grabbed another test, then another. All positive. Panic set in. She felt like she couldn't breathe. Just weeks ago, she had spent one reckless night with a mystery man, the night she had convinced herself to forget. No names, no attachments, no future. But fate had other plans. Her trembling fingers reached for her phone, dialing the only person she could trust. "Mia? What's wrong?" Sophie's voice came through instantly. "Can you come over?" Mia whispered, her voice shaking. "Of course. Give me 10 minutes. Mia sat on the couch, hugging a pillow, her mind spinning. The knock on the door came fast, and before she could react, Sophie burst in, eyes filled with worry. "Okay, spill. What happened?" Mia hesitated, then simply held up the pregnancy test. Sophie's jaw dropped. "Holy Mia. Are you serious?" Mia nodded weakly. Sophie slowly sat beside her, absorbing the news. Then, after a long pause, she asked the one question Mia had been dreading. "Who's the father?" Mia let out a hollow laugh. I don't know." Sophie blinked. "What do you mean you don't know?" Mia closed her eyes, rubbing her temples. "Remember that gala last month? I met someone. We spent the night together, but we never exchanged names. And now," she motioned to the test. "Now I'm pregnant with a stranger's baby." Sophie exhaled, clearly stunned. "Mia, this is huge. Are you okay?" Mia wasn't okay. Her whole world had been about control, about planning her future step by step. And now, everything was spiraling out of control. "I don't know what to do," Mia admitted, her voice barely a whisper. Sophie took her hand. "Whatever you decide, you won't be alone." Mia swallowed the lump in her throat. She had always been strong, independent. She had built a career, a reputation. But could she do this? Could she raise a child alone? And more importantly, could she ever forget the man who unknowingly left a piece of himself behind? Mia had always been a planner, a woman who mapped out every detail of her life, ensuring that no surprises would knock her off balance. But standing here, staring at the ultrasound screen as the doctor pointed to the tiny life growing inside her, she felt utterly unprepared. "That's your baby," the doctor said, smiling. Mia's breath hitched. The rhythmic sound of a tiny heartbeat filled the room, steady and strong. A part of her wanted to break down, overwhelmed by the reality of it all. She was going to be a mother. She was going to raise a child. Alone. Her fingers curled against her stomach protectively. No, she corrected herself. Not alone. My child will have me. And she would give this baby everything. 5 years later. The city skyline stretched endlessly before her as Mia stood in front of her office window. She had done it. 5 years. 5 long, exhausting years of hard work, sleepless nights, and pushing through doubts. She had built a thriving business, a consulting firm that was now one of the most sought after in the industry. And she had done it all while raising her son, Leo. "Mommy." A loud giggle filled the air as a blur of tiny feet rushed into the office. Mia turned just in time to catch Leo as he launched himself into her arms. His soft brown curls bounced as he looked up at her, his wide hazel eyes filled with excitement. "I drew something for you," he said proudly, holding up a piece of paper. Mia smiled as she took it, her heart warming. It was a stick figure drawing of her and Leo, holding hands with a huge sun in the background. But something caught her eye, a tall figure standing beside them, drawn in dark crayon. "And who's this?" she asked, though she already had a feeling. Leo grinned. "That's my daddy. I don't know what he looks like, but I think he's tall like a superhero." Mia's breath caught in her throat. Leo had never met his father, never asked about him. But lately, he had started noticing the absence. She had no answer to give him. Her mystery man from 5 years ago still remained a mystery. She had never tried to find him. She could have. That watch he left behind, she still had it, safely tucked away in a box. She had taken it to a luxury watch dealer once, thinking maybe she could trace it, but when they told her it was a custom-made, one-of-a-kind design, something inside her had hesitated. Did she really want to know? She had convinced herself that it didn't matter, that she didn't need a name or a face, that she was enough for Leo. But standing here now, seeing the longing in her son's eyes, doubt crept in. Before she could say anything, a knock at the door interrupted them. "Mia?" Her assistant, Claire, peeked in holding a file folder. "Your meeting with Blackwood Enterprises is in an hour. Mr. Damien Blackwood himself will be leading the negotiation." Mia nodded, regaining her composure. "Thanks, Claire. I'll be ready." As Claire left, Mia let out a slow breath. She had heard of Damien Blackwood, one of the most powerful business magnates in the country. Ruthless, ambitious, and completely untouchable. This deal could change everything for her company. She just hoped she was ready for it. The boardroom was sleek and modern, with a long glass table reflecting the soft glow of the city lights. Mia sat at the head of her side, scanning the proposal in front of her, waiting. Then, the door swung open. She felt him before she saw him. A presence so commanding it made the air in the room thicker. Damien Blackwood entered. Tall. Confident. Dressed in a dark tailored suit that fit him perfectly. Sharp jawline, piercing dark eyes, and an aura of quiet dominance. Mia's stomach twisted in a way she hadn't felt in years. He looked familiar. Too familiar. Then, he turned his gaze on her. And everything froze. His eyes widened just a fraction, a quick flash of shock, recognition, before his expression smoothed into unreadable calm. For a split second, Mia couldn't breathe. It wasn't possible. It couldn't be. But deep down she already knew. The mystery man from that night, the father of her son, was standing right in front of her. Mia's mind raced. He doesn't know. He has no idea that night changed both their lives. She should tell him. But what if he wants nothing to do with them? What if he tries to take Leo away? And worst of all, What if he remembers nothing about her? As Damien's lips curled into a knowing smirk, his deep voice breaking the silence. Well, we meet again. Mia realized one thing. This was just the beginning. Mia's grip on the pen tightened as Damien Blackwood took his seat at the table, his movements slow and deliberate. She could feel his eyes on her, watching, not just with the sharpness of a businessman, but with something deeper. Something dangerous. We meet again. His words echoed in her mind, and she forced herself to keep her expression neutral. He knows. Or, at least, he suspects. For 5 years, she had locked away the memories of that night, convinced that their paths would never cross again. And now, here he was, sitting across from her in a high-stakes business deal, unaware of the secret she carried. She had to stay professional. Focus on the deal. Not on the way his deep voice sent shivers down her spine. Miss Carter, your company has built an impressive reputation, Damien said smoothly, glancing at the proposal in front of him. But I don't make investments based on reputation alone. Mia lifted her chin. That's understandable. I believe our numbers speak for themselves. Damien's lips curled slightly, as if amused. They do. But I prefer to know the person I'm doing business with. Her heart pounded, but she held his gaze. Then let's talk business, Mr. Blackwood. That is why we're here, after all. His fingers tapped against the table, slow and measured. Of course. The room was filled with tension, not just professional, but something unspoken, something electric. Mia forced herself to focus. She had worked too hard to let this, a past mistake, cloud her judgment. But then Damien leaned in slightly, his dark eyes locking onto hers. Tell me, Miss Carter, have we met before? The question sent a jolt through her. Her stomach twisted. Did he remember? Was he testing her? For a split second, she considered lying, pretending they were strangers. But she saw the way he watched her, the way his gaze flickered, as if he was trying to piece something together. Mia swallowed hard. I don't believe so. His smirk deepened, but he didn't push further. Not yet. The meeting lasted over an hour, filled with strategy, numbers, and carefully chosen words. But throughout it all, Mia felt the weight of Damien's gaze. When the meeting finally ended, Claire approached her as the other executives filed out. You did amazing, Claire whispered. I think he's impressed. Mia exhaled, nodding. Let's hope that translates into a deal. But as she gathered her things, a low voice stopped her. Miss Carter. She turned to see Damien still seated, his expression unreadable. I'd like to discuss something privately. Would you join me for dinner tonight? Her pulse quickened. She knew this wasn't just about business. And yet, she found herself answering. All right. Where? Damien's gaze darkened slightly, as if he had expected her to refuse. But instead, he smiled. I'll send a car for you at 7. Mia nodded, but as she walked out of the boardroom, her heart raced. This wasn't just a business dinner. This was a storm waiting to break. Mia arrived at the restaurant at exactly 7, her nerves buzzing. It wasn't the upscale setting that unsettled her. It was him. Damien was already seated at a private table, his presence commanding. As she approached, he stood, pulling out her chair. Polite. Calculated. Dangerous. Interesting choice, she said, glancing around. I expected something grander. Damien smirked. Sometimes simplicity is best. It allows for clearer conversations. She sat, her fingers tightening around her wine glass. So, what did you want to discuss? Damien took a sip of his drink, watching her over the rim. You. Her breath caught. He set his glass down. I don't believe in coincidences, Mia. The way he said her name sent a shiver through her. I spent the last 5 years building an empire, he continued. And yet, I never forgot that night. Her pulse roared in her ears. He remembered. Damien leaned closer, his voice dropping. I left something behind that night. A watch. And now, I can't help but wonder, what else did I leave behind? Mia's heart stopped. He knew. Or at least he was damn close to figuring it out. She needed to end this. Now. Mia forced a smile, lifting her glass. I think you're overestimating a single night, Mr. Blackwood. But Damien's smirk deepened, his eyes burning into hers. Am I? Mia kept her expression poised, but inside, her heart raced. Damien Blackwood wasn't a man who spoke without purpose. If he suspected the truth, if he was digging, then she had to be careful. She took a slow sip of her wine, willing her hands to stay steady. A single night doesn't change lives, Mr. Blackwood. Damien's gaze darkened. Are you sure about that? For a moment, silence hung between them. Thick, unspoken, dangerous. He was waiting for a reaction, a crack in her composure. Mia refused to give him one. She set down her glass and smiled. If this isn't about business, I should leave. I don't entertain casual speculation. Damien leaned back in his chair, his expression unreadable. Fair enough, Mia. But tell me something, do you believe in fate? Her stomach tightened. Fate? Fate had given her a son. Fate had kept Damien out of her life for 5 years. And now fate was dragging them back together. She forced a light laugh. Fate is an excuse people use when they don't want to take responsibility for their actions. Damien's lips curled slightly, but his eyes held something sharper. Interesting answer. Mia picked up her purse, signaling the conversation was over. If we're done here, I'll be expecting Blackwood Enterprises' response to my proposal soon. Damien stood as well, but as she turned to leave, his voice stopped her. You kept it, didn't you? She froze. Slowly, she turned back to him, keeping her expression neutral. Kept what? Damien's gaze never wavered. The watch. Mia's breath caught. How did he? I checked with the hotel. Damien continued smoothly. They confirmed that nothing was turned in that night. And knowing what kind of woman you are, his smirk deepened, you wouldn't have pawned it. Mia swallowed, forcing herself to remain calm. Why does it matter? Damien's eyes burned into hers. Because I never forget what belongs to me. Her heart slammed against her ribs. This man was too sharp, too persistent. He wasn't going to let this go. Mia needed to get out. Now. She forced a polite smile. Good night, Mr. Blackwood. Then, without waiting for his response, she turned and walked away. She didn't look back. Mia's hands trembled as she unlocked the door to her apartment. She slipped inside, shutting it behind her and exhaling shakily. Leo was already asleep in his bed, curled up with his favorite stuffed tiger. She walked over, brushing his curls back and pressing a kiss to his forehead. What happens if he finds out? She had spent years protecting Leo from the past, from the unknown. But now, the past was chasing her down. And Damien Blackwood? He wasn't a man who let things slip away. Mia clenched her fists. She wouldn't let him take her son. Damien sat in the back of his car, swirling the whiskey in his glass. Mia Carter. She had tried so hard to act unaffected tonight. But her reaction had told him everything. That watch had been expensive, unique, and yet she never returned it. Why? A memory surfaced. The way she had looked at him back then, equal parts nervous and reckless. A woman who had thrown caution to the wind for just one night, and then disappeared. Now, 5 years later, she had built an empire. But there was something else she was hiding. Damien took a slow sip of his drink, his jaw tightening. I'll find out, Mia. Whatever you're hiding, I'll find it. And this time, he wouldn't let her walk away. Damien Blackwood wasn't a man who let curiosity go unanswered. The moment Mia Carter walked away from him, he knew he wouldn't rest until he uncovered everything she was hiding. Back at his penthouse, he sat in his dimly lit office, his fingers tapping against his desk as he stared at his laptop screen. He had already instructed his assistant to gather every piece of information available on Mia. But official records could only tell him so much. Her rise in the business world had been impressive, almost too smooth. 5 years ago, she had been a promising strategist, but nowhere near the level of power she held now. And then, seemingly out of nowhere, she had built an empire. Something was missing, and Damien had never been one to ignore gaps in a story. A knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. His assistant Logan stepped in, holding a file. You asked for everything on Mia Carter, Logan said, placing the file on Damien's desk. She's clean. No scandals, no criminal records, nothing suspicious.
But
Damien arched a brow. But Logan hesitated. I did some digging beyond the usual sources. She keeps her personal life extremely private. No relationships, no dating history after that one-night stand 5 years ago. And then there's this.
he slid a photo across the desk.
Damien picked it up and froze. It was a grainy image taken at a park. A little boy, no older than 4 or 5, playing with a soccer ball. A little boy with dark hair and striking gray eyes. Eyes that were identical to his own. The air in the room thickened. Damien's grip on the photo tightened as his mind raced. 5 years. That was exactly how long it had been since that night. And this boy couldn't be a coincidence. A strange, unfamiliar emotion coiled in his chest. He was a man who had always been in control, always 10 steps ahead. But now, for the first time in years, he had been blindsided. Logan shifted uncomfortably. Sir, do you want me to keep looking into it? Damien's jaw clenched. There was no hesitation in his answer. Find out everything about that child. The next morning, Mia was at her office, trying to focus on the upcoming investor meeting, but her mind kept drifting back to the previous night. Damien had been watching her too closely, asking too many questions. She had spent 5 years keeping her life hidden, keeping Leo safe. But what if? A knock on the door interrupted her thoughts. Claire peeked in, her face uncertain. Mia, you have a visitor. He says it's urgent. Mia frowned. Who is it? Claire hesitated. Damien Blackwood. Mia's heart stopped. A wave of dread crashed over her, but she quickly masked it with a composed expression. Send him in, she said, her voice even. Moments later, Damien walked in, exuding power and control as always. But there was something different in his eyes today, something dangerous. He closed the door behind him, his movements slow and deliberate. Damien, she said coolly, this is a surprise. He didn't respond immediately. Instead, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a photograph, the same photograph Logan had found. He placed it on her desk. Mia's stomach dropped. The image of Leo stared back at her. Damien's voice was quiet, but laced with steel. Would you like to explain this? Her hands clenched under the desk, but her face remained impassive. Explain what? His jaw tightened. Don't play games with me, Mia. She met his gaze, refusing to show weakness. I don't know what you're implying. Damien leaned forward, his presence overwhelming. 5 years ago, we spent a night together. And 5 years later, there's a boy who looks exactly like me. Mia's breath hitched, but she kept her expression unreadable. Damien's eyes burned into hers. Tell me the truth, Mia. Is he mine? The words hung in the air, heavy and irreversible. Mia's world tilted. And for the first time, she didn't know how to escape. Silence stretched between them like a live wire, ready to snap. Mia forced herself to stay calm, even as her pulse thundered in her ears. Damien's gray eyes, so much like Leo's, bore into hers, demanding answers. Tell me the truth, Mia. Is he mine? She knew this moment would come one day, but she had always hoped it wouldn't. Taking a slow breath, she met his gaze head-on. Why does it matter? Damien's expression darkened, his jaw clenching. Are you really asking me that? Mia forced a small, bitter laugh. You walked away that night without a second thought, Damien. You didn't even ask my name. And now you suddenly care? His hands flattened against the desk, his patience thinning. I didn't ask because I thought it was just one night. You made it clear you wanted the same. And I did, she admitted. But life doesn't always go as planned. His eyes flickered, a fraction of hesitation. Mia exhaled slowly. There was no use denying it anymore. Yes, she whispered. Leo is yours. The words landed like a bomb. Damien stiffened, his entire body going rigid. He had expected this answer, yet hearing it out loud still shook him. He turned away, pacing to the window. His fingers ran through his hair, his breath uneven. You should have told me. Mia's chest tightened. And then what? You would have stepped in? Claimed him?
You didn't even know me, Damien.
I wasn't going to hand my child over to a stranger. Damien turned back to her, his gaze now unreadable. I'm not a stranger anymore. Mia's heart skipped. That doesn't mean you get to walk in and take over his life. His jaw flexed. I don't plan to take him from you, Mia. She stared at him, searching for deception. Then what do you want? Damien took a step closer. I want to know my son. Her throat tightened. You can't just appear out of nowhere and expect me to. I'm not asking, he cut in, his voice low, firm. I'm telling you, I won't walk away from him. Mia swallowed, a storm raging inside her. She had spent years protecting Leo, keeping their life stable. Now, Damien was threatening to change everything. You don't even know him, she whispered. Then introduce me, Damien challenged. Mia's pulse pounded. Letting Damien into Leo's life meant risking everything. But one look at Damien's face told her one thing for sure. He wasn't going anywhere. Mia spent the next few days in a state of constant anxiety. Every time she looked at Leo, she thought of Damien, his piercing gray eyes, his commanding presence, the undeniable resemblance between father and son. How had she been so naive to think she could hide forever? Mommy? Leo's voice snapped her out of her thoughts. He stood in the kitchen doorway, his small hands gripping the edge of the counter as he blinked up at her. You okay? He asked, tilting his head. Mia forced a smile, walking over to ruffle his dark hair. Of course, sweetheart. Just tired. Leo studied her, his eyes thoughtful. You work too much. She let out a soft chuckle. Somebody has to make sure you get all those superhero toys you like. His lips curled into a grin. Iron Man is my favorite. Mia's heart clenched. Of course he liked Iron Man, the billionaire, genius, powerful yet emotionally distant hero. She bit her lip. Would he see Damien as a hero too? The thought unsettled her more than she wanted to admit. 2 days later, Mia received an unexpected call from Claire while she was at work. You won't believe this, Claire said, her voice hushed. Damien Blackwood is here. Mia froze. What? She whispered, gripping the phone. He's in the lobby, Claire hissed. He didn't make an appointment. Just walked in like he owns the place. Because that was exactly what Damien Blackwood did. Mia inhaled sharply. Send him to my office. A few minutes later, her door swung open and Damien stepped inside. He looked as powerful as ever. Broad shoulders, expensive suit, and an unreadable expression. But there was something different in his eyes. Something determined. Mia leaned back in her chair, keeping her expression neutral. I assume this isn't a social visit. Damien didn't sit. He walked to the window, looking out over the city, before turning back to face her. I want to see him. Mia's stomach tightened. You can't just demand that, Damien. He exhaled, pacing toward her desk. I gave you time to think, Mia. But I'm done waiting. Her fingers curled into her palm. You don't know anything about him. Then let me change that, he shot back. Mia shook her head, her heart racing. Leo has a life. A stable one. I won't let you come in, and I don't want to ruin his life, Mia. Damien interrupted, his voice softer now. I just want to be part of it. She swallowed, torn between fear and reality. Damien Blackwood wasn't a man who took no for an answer. And deep down, she knew she couldn't keep Leo from his father forever. But letting Damien in meant risking everything. Her carefully built world, her control over her son's life, and maybe, just maybe, her own heart. Mia had spent 5 years building a life where she controlled every variable. But the moment she agreed to let Damien meet Leo, she felt like she had lost control completely. She sat in the driver's seat outside a small cafe, gripping the steering wheel. Leo sat in the back, swinging his legs, oblivious to the storm inside her. Are we meeting someone? He asked, his bright eyes curious. Mia hesitated. How was she supposed to explain this? How did she tell her 5-year-old that he was about to meet the man who had unknowingly changed both of their lives? She swallowed hard.
Yes.
He's an old friend. Leo accepted this without question, his excitement growing. Does he like superheroes? Mia forced a smile. I guess we'll find out. Her heart pounded as she stepped out, opening the door for Leo. She held his small hand tightly, as if that could somehow protect them both. Inside, Damien was already waiting. He stood near the back of the cafe, dressed in his usual tailored suit, but for once, there was no air of business about him. Just a man who was about to meet his son. His sharp gaze landed on them immediately, and something shifted in his expression. Mia's grip on Leo tightened. "Come on, sweetheart," she murmured, leading him forward. Leo studied Damien the way only a child could, without filters, without hesitation. Damien, on the other hand, looked like a man who had been punched in the gut. Mia saw it, the realization crashing over him as he took in the boy's dark hair, his striking gray eyes, the undeniable resemblance. His son. For a man who never showed emotion, Damien suddenly looked wrecked. Mia cleared her throat. "Leo, this is Damien. She faltered. Damien stepped in, his voice smoother than hers. "I'm a friend of your mom's," he said carefully. "And I've been wanting to meet you." Leo tilted his head. "Do you like Iron Man?" A slow, stunned pause. Then, to Mia's complete shock, Damien's lips twitched. "Yeah," he said. "Iron Man's pretty cool." Leo's eyes lit up. "Do you know who would win in a fight, Iron Man or Batman?" Another beat of silence. Then Damien, the ruthless billionaire, actually considered the question. "Depends," he said. "Are we talking about strategy or technology?" Leo gasped. "You think about strategy too?" Mia watched, stunned, as her son and Damien fell into conversation like they had known each other forever. But just as she started to think, just maybe, this might work, Leo's next word shattered everything. "Are you my dad?" The air in the cafe vanished. Mia's heart stopped. Damien's expression froze. And for the first time in his life, Damien Blackwood didn't have an answer. Silence. Thick, heavy, unforgiving. Leo's innocent question hung in the air, waiting for an answer. Mia's pulse pounded as she looked at Damien, whose normally controlled expression was nowhere to be found. His jaw clenched, his hands curled into fists, and his gray eyes locked onto hers, asking for permission. She had spent years keeping this truth from Leo, protecting him, shielding him. But could she really lie to him now? Her throat tightened. She crouched to Leo's level, brushing his hair gently. "Sweetheart," she said softly, "why do you ask that?" Leo blinked, glancing at Damien. "Because..." He hesitated, as if afraid to say it aloud. "Because he looks like me." Mia's heart broke. She swallowed hard, stealing a glance at Damien. He was motionless, waiting. Then, with a deep breath, she turned back to her son. "Leo," she whispered. "Yes, Damien is your dad." The words landed like a thunderclap. Leo's eyes widened. He stared at Damien, then at Mia, then back again. "Really?" His voice was small, almost disbelieving. Damien finally moved. He crouched, mirroring Mia, so he was at eye level with Leo. "Yes," he said, his voice thick. "I am." Mia held her breath, waiting for Leo to cry, to yell, to ask why his dad had never been there before. But instead, Leo smiled. A wide, uncomplicated smile. "That's so cool," he gasped. "Does that mean I get to be rich now?" Mia choked on a laugh. Damien, caught completely off guard, let out a low chuckle, the first real laugh she had ever heard from him. "You're already rich in personality," Damien teased, ruffling his hair. "But yeah, kid, you're my son, which means you'll always have everything you need." Leo beamed. "Can I get a Batmobile?" Mia groaned. "Oh my God." Damien smirked, looking at her with amusement. "I like him." She rolled her eyes. "Of course you do." But deep inside, warmth bloomed in her chest. Maybe, just maybe, she had been wrong to keep them apart. The weeks that followed were chaotic. Damien spent time with Leo, real time. He took him to amusement parks, taught him chess, sat through endless superhero discussions. And every day, Mia watched their bond grow stronger. And yet, Damien never pushed her. He never demanded more than she was ready to give. One night, after Leo had fallen asleep, she found Damien standing on her balcony, looking out at the city. "You're good with him," she admitted, stepping beside him. Damien glanced at her. I should have been there from the start. Mia sighed. You didn't know. But you did, he said quietly. And you still kept him from me. Her stomach twisted. I thought I was doing what was best. Damien exhaled slowly, then turned fully to face her. And what about now? Mia's breath caught. The air between them shifted. His gaze burned. What do you want now, Mia? She wanted to say she didn't know, that she still needed time. But when Damien reached out, brushing a strand of hair from her face, her heart betrayed her. She wanted him. Not just for Leo. Not just for their son's sake. But for her. Mia's voice was barely a whisper. I want to try. A slow, rare smile curved Damien's lips. Then let's try, he murmured. And this time, neither of them walked away.